442. It was suggested by the European Commission that the next EU budget should have 6.5 billion for military spending. And many of us in this House, as you've heard some of the speeches earlier on, would oppose this direction. The increased militarisation of the EU and the moves to create an EU standing army has to be opposed. It is a negative development, undermines Irish neutrality, and it's the wrong direction for the EU to go. Ireland should remove itself immediately from these plans and not provide 1 cent of Irish taxpayers' hard-earned money to PESCO and other EU military projects. This European Council meeting also discussed the situation in Syria and released a declaration on the fighting in Idlib. But I think we'd all agree that we have to see an end to the conflict in Syria and a political solution to the crisis through an inclusive peace process for the Syrian people without foreign interference. But disappointingly, the EU's declaration did not make one mention of the fact that Turkey has illegally moved its forces into the region. And again, there was no mention in the Taoiseach speech or the Taoiseach speeches in relation to that. Since the beginning of the hostilities in Turkey, they've repeatedly backed radical jihadist groups in the conflict and provided support and assistance to them, which has drawn out the war. They've also attacked the YPG and other Kurdish forces who successfully repelled ISIS and other extreme jihadist groups. Turkey has accused the EU of betrayal for failing to uphold an agreement on Syrian refugees. Sinn Féin at the time opposed the EU-Turkey deal, because it involves transferring billions of EU money to Erdogan's autocratic regime in return for them forcibly stopping refugees seeking asylum. It clearly violated international law and the human rights of Syrian refugees. So the deal gave additional powers to President Erdogan and allows him to use refugees as pawns as he attempts to extract concessions from the EU and also his NATO allies. In response to recent military defeats in Syria, Erdogan is doing just that. And this has led to appalling scenes and clashes on the Greek islands. Greece and Italy were already struggling to process and take care of refugees. Moria refugee camp in Lesbos is a former detention centre with capacity for less than 3,000 people. At present, the camp has more than 20,000 inhabitants. Almost half of those are children. One child also died on Monday after a boat carrying 48 people capsized in Greek waters south of Lesbos. No child should drown in European waters, fleeing violence and seeking safety. And we know that refugees and those who provide assistance to refugees, like volunteer doctors, have been attacked. Inflammatory and militarist language from the EU and national policy makers contributes to the risk of violence against people seeking protection and against organisations and individuals who provide and support and show solidarity. So Ireland and other EU members need to mount a collective emergency response, providing humanitarian assistance, humane reception conditions and access to asylum process for people arriving. And this should be a coalition of all the countries willing to work together to support border counties. There's clearly no need to wait for those unwilling to assist, and that's the message I'd send out here today. I'd appeal to TDs who are interested in what's happening in that part of the world to read Kiefer Butterley's article today in the Irish Examiner. She talks in terms of the harrowing scenes, the desperation of those in the camp, but also, you know, one thing, the echo, the coughing of children that, you know, echoes throughout the camp come night time. So I appeal to people to listen to that, and you might have a different perspective on what's happening to refugees in Europe.